Last time on Intuitive Deep Dive, we talked about Myers-Briggs personality type indicator, and we got into the introduction, the basics, the fundamentals of it. And at the end of the video, podcast episode, we promised that we were going to go in depth about cognitive functions.
Cognitive functions are basically the underlying functions of each type. It's going more in depth about the small things each one does, but not too specific, because then you'd have to have a bunch of different functions for each type. So we've narrowed it down to about 2 functions per type, and this is basically what the contribution that Carl Jung started with this all. He got the cognitive types. Isabel Myers-Briggs formulated them into personalities.
This will be the primary topic of today's episode of Intuitive Deep Dive. Cognitive functions explained. We should first explain why this is important. To better understand Myers-Briggs personality type, you must understand the cognitive functions. And if you can understand the cognitive functions, you're able to understand the strengths and weaknesses possessed in not only yourself, but in others. By understanding these cognitive functions, you will not only find ways to better relate to other people, but you will also find ways to better understand your strengths and weaknesses.
This is key for self-growth, because if you're trying to make yourself a better person and you don't know what kind of person you are already, you don't know what to keep and what to change, what to grow and what to let die. That's kind of a painful process, letting part of you die. It's like rotten wood. You have to get rid of all of it if it's rotten. Because that part of you that you had because you liked it. So letting it die because it's not helpful or it's toxic to your person will be painful because you liked that trait. So that's why it's important to change, and that's why it's hard to change. But nonetheless, that's what we're here to help you with today, and the rest of this podcast for that matter.
With that down, let's establish what the cognitive functions are. We know that there are 8 cognitive functions.
Each function has 2 letters denoting a package of behaviors that occur together. If you want to figure out which cognitive functions connect to your personality type and which ones you use, you can just look up cognitive functions.
We want to explain the cognitive functions in depth, how they work with yourself, how they work with others.
Alright, pop quiz. What is introverted intuition?
Okay. The starting one.
It's a cognitive function.
We know that introverted intuition is one of the strangest of the cognitive functions. One of the hardest to describe. It is essentially knowing without learning. Knowing without knowing. Thinking without thinking. It's very difficult to describe, and it's very difficult to even know if you have it. People who have introverted intuition will spend a lot of time thinking or just going about their day, and then all of a sudden come to a conclusion, to an answer, and it was actually well-rounded, and it helps the solution. It seems to almost come out of nowhere. But the person was indeed putting thought into these ideas. This is introverted intuition. Spontaneity, but also not spontaneity.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. It is the stereotypical intuition, knowing without knowing, and I've kind of pinned it on. It's kind of the subconscious deducing and thought process that goes on outside of your conscious thought. What your brain does on its own. So it's more drawn out, so you can do it for long periods of time. It is harder to detect and understand. A good example of introverted intuition is Jordan Peterson. He has mastered the art of using the NI cognitive function, he kind of says exactly what's on his mind, and he's so precise and just summons it up from the subconscious. It's amazing.
Alright, Thomas, now I gotta ask you something.
Alright.
Describe to me what extroverted intuition is.
Yes. So, extroverted intuition, it's more of a quick burn compared to introverted intuition. Because introverted intuition is more like a constant machine in the back of your mind that's always running. Whereas extroverted intuition is more like a quick burn. So they're really good at acting on the fly and rolling with the punches, because they instantly can deduce things really quickly, but it burns them out fast too. So NI is more slow and steady, and NE is more quick and fast.
Now, before we move on to the other 6 remaining cognitive functions, we wanted to add about a topic we've put a lot of thought into, something that is really intriguing, everyone should almost consider, in a sense. Self-awareness. The ability to understand things that you can't quite grasp. Seeing yourself from a third-person perspective. Being able to challenge your own beliefs. Knowing that you don't know everything and that there is much more to learn. You see yourself from another perspective.
Yeah, this trait that we've labeled self-awareness is, I've actually tried to define it, and I think I've gotten pretty dang close. But it's a long definition. It's when you can see yourself from a third-person perspective, but also in someone else's shoes, using empathy, as well as being aware of what's going on inside your head and what's going on, like, how your body's reacting, what your actions are. All of those things is being self-aware, aware of yourself from all the different perspectives. And this is a super useful trait, because there's a lot of people who get lost in, for example, their job, and they'll mindlessly work all day just because they need the money. And they don't realize that they can go pursue a different path because they never really think about it. You need to be aware of your position in life on the big scale, but also on the smaller scale, because it's really those micro habits that get you started. It's a lot harder to climb a mountain if you don't know how to climb a set of stairs.
Now, how exactly does this correlate to the first 2 cognitive functions we discussed? Both types of intuition. Well, intuition is essentially abstract thought. It is thinking about the bigger picture, outside of the box. The concepts you can't quite put a finger on. Intuition is a very useful tool for self-awareness, for strengthening self-awareness. So if you're an individual who's hearing this and wants to increase their level of self-awareness, then you, my friend, need to understand your intuition. You need to consistently strengthen your intuition. How do you do that? By thinking, by reading, by spending time trying to understand the abstract.
It's a lot of reflecting, and it's a lot of speculation, and it's gonna feel useless. I spent a whole summer in my basement staring at the wall, but I got it together. I wouldn't recommend that strategy, but just setting aside maybe 1 day a week, or maybe an hour each day to either meditate and reflect, that's what you need, is to become aware of yourself just for a moment at a time.
And really, once you start to implement this into your lifestyle, you start to kind of look at things from a different angle, and that's something that you just have to understand on your own. Now, we've already addressed both types of intuition. Now let's move on to sensing.
Right. Sensing is the opposite of intuition. Intuitives like models in their brain, they kind of abstract thought, and they kind of keep it in their head. Sensors are all about the objective reality. They are outside their head, and notice they're all about the objective details, the concrete thinking.
They use the objective tools they are given to find information and critically analyze their situations. Now, getting into depth about both extroverted and introverted sensing, let's start with extroverted sensing. Thomas?
Extroverted sensors are completely outside their head. Their priority is taking in raw information through all their five senses and just going straight in. And they also use introverted intuition, so they process it without noticing. Their automatic focus is to focus on the real world and take in all the details, every single one.
Introverted sensing is essentially being able to pull out information from the past to then critique yourself and continue moving forward. Introverted sensors love tradition. They love structure. They love routine. They love rules, law. These are people who are supported by the structural foundations that they establish, their family establishes, or that society establishes. These are people who love to stay in line and love to fill the security.
Yeah, so that's sensors for you. Let's talk about the pros. Camden, what are the pros of being a sensor?
Being able to properly utilize sensing will give you an objective edge. What do I mean by this? If you can utilize sensing in situations where you need to act quickly, this is a good strength of sensors because they can act quickly and logically. While what they do might not have a lot of reflection time and analyzing time and planning, the decisions that they make, if they are well-rounded and are a good sensor, are going to help them make quick decisions that are backed by logic that will help them in situations where they need to react tactile.
Yeah, it really does cut out the extra speculation that intuitives might have, and it's more concrete thinking, working with hierarchies instead of algorithms. So shortcuts, so you can react much more quickly without as much thought.
Being able to utilize sensing correctly in your own life is going to help give you a cutting edge on these specific scenarios. Let's move on to the third letter slot. Let's start with the feeling side. Alright, with feeling, we have extroverted and introverted feeling.
Introverted feeling is a decision-making function. Introverted feelers make their decisions based off of what they feel is morally wrong or morally right. FI users are also very reflective and try to understand their own emotions even if they can't make someone else understand them. They'll understand it themselves. So they're very empathetic because of that, because they know what they're going through, so they can read other people and know what another person's going through.
They're very emotionally intelligent. They can understand their emotions, quickly assess them, and they can deal with them in a very effective manner that helps them not explode.
Yeah, that's a big problem. FI users are also good when it comes to being neurotic. Neurotic being changes in emotion often. So they can really roll with the punches there too. Contrasting that, what is FE?
Extroverted feeling. Essentially, extroverted feelers, especially people who have extroverted feeling as their dominant cognitive function, are people who are able to have really good intimate relationships. What I mean by this is that they're very good at relationship making and maintaining. they're very seemingly empathetic. Extroverted feelers have a very innate desire to help others, especially those who are struggling with things that the extroverted feeler themselves has dealt with. It is almost nature to them to assist and build people up. They desire to strengthen other people in their lives.
That sounds about right. Yeah, their basic foundation is they have, whether they realize it or not, a set of rules that they follow that they've made themselves off of their own moral virtues. And moral virtues might actually be developed, and they might be able to articulate that too. So, pros to being a feeler?
Feelers are people who are going to be very emotionally intelligent. They can understand their emotions, and especially with the introverted feelers, especially the empathy that they can show towards others. So, being a feeler gives you the ability to understand your emotions, deal with neuroticism, for those who have it especially, and helps other people deal with their emotions and their neuroticism, so they can properly navigate their way through the emotional struggles of life.
Feelers tend to, be girls. Most girls are feelers. And I think most guys are thinkers. But I think a guy is more likely to be a feeler than a girl is to be a thinker.
Okay, Thomas, I want to discuss your point that you made about men naturally being thinkers and women naturally being feelers. While gender roles that we've established make sense for that, I have met more men who are feelers than thinkers. At least me personally. I met a large amount of them. Now the thing is that not all of these men are very feminine. In fact, most of them are even more masculine than thinkers.
And maybe even stoic.
Rather, I think that being a feeler indicates that this is a person who has a better understanding of being. For the hardcore thinkers out there, they don't take the time to truly understand their emotions. Now, there are times that you cannot clearly indicate your emotions, and that you cannot spend time stinging on them. You have to ignore them. That is true, and that is something that thinkers are good at. The problem is doing this at inappropriate times is not good for the individual, and in fact could potentially cause neuroticism.
And existential angst.
So what I think it is feelers are people who can properly identify themselves. They are people who have a better mental understanding, and in some cases even better mental health than a thinker. That is what I've concluded. That they are people who just have a better understanding of being, of their innate human desires, and that they can control them. Now, to the next two cognitive functions, we get onto the thinking aspect. Alright, thinking. Thomas, would you like to start off with extroverted or introverted thinking? I can't decide.
I'll decide extroverted thinking. Extroverted thinkers, first of all, thinkers in general, use cold, hard logic to make their decisions. And the extroverted aspect is the extroverted thinkers, they think with a goal in mind and then work towards that goal and problem solve. So they're very objective oriented and like systems. They like working with, making, and fixing systems. Problem solving is their little silver lining, their golden highlight. You think, is that all? You got anything else?
That's for extroverted thinking?
Yeah.
Structure, foundation, I think you pretty much well assessed that, right?
Nice.
Structure, foundation, problem solving, analyzing, stuff like that.
You want to move on to TI?
All right, TI. So, introverted thinking, in contrast to extroverted thinking, where they like to take systems that have already been established and then use those to make their decisions. Introverted thinkers are usually people who like to make their own systems. They spend a lot of time thinking. They take a lot of data and things from their surroundings, and with that information, piece together their own systematic ways of dealing with situations. And these systematic ways are not always the same. They can differ, they can change, depending on the introverted thinker as well. But they create their own constructs, logic, in a sense.
Introverted thinkers, their main focus is the truth, which is why they do speculating about seemingly trivial things. So they're focused on the truth. And actually, a famous TI user is Albert Einstein. He was definitely a master of introverted thinking, and I don't even know what he contributed to the atomic bomb and
Holy
the what was it called? E equals mc squared.
Oh, I forgot. Oh,
The theory and the theory of relativity and all that.
Let's talk about the pros of the thinking cognitive function.
Thinkers, like I think I mentioned before, they're cold, hard logic. That's what they use. So it simplifies everything when you don't have to factor in emotions to an equation. Like, words are the language of logic, and that doesn't convert to emotions. So you can explain logic, you cannot explain emotions very well, and they're subjective. So it's really hard when you're trying to find the truth and be logical and go through all your personal algorithms to find the truth when emotions are in the way. So what they do is they block out emotions and they kind of don't focus on them, which makes them less emotional people themselves. So you can get in a vigorous argument with them, and afterwards they won't take it personally. In the pursuit of truth, anything goes with them. Can you think of any more strengths?
Thinkers are going to be people who will help in quick problem-solving situations. In a situation where a problem is at hand, if you have a thinker, especially a thinker who likes to be a role model or a leader, this is a person who's going to take the wheel and navigate you to the correct destination. They will be a big hand in problem solving, especially the extroverted thinkers. But thinking is a very good tool for problem solving, the thinking function. And with that all said, in this episode we have thoroughly addressed all of the 8 cognitive functions. Until next time. And remember,
there's always another perspective.